Martial arts have been around for a very long time. I don't think I'm exaggerating when I say that human beings probably figured out ways to punch each other before they figured out ways to talk to each other. And as a result, there have been a lot of myths about martial arts. Things that you can do, things that you should do, and things that you absolutely shouldn't ever do. In today's video, we're going to take a look at 6 of the most common myths that I see in martial arts and decide once and for all, are they true or are they false? But before we get started, make sure you're subscribed and you have notifications turned on. That way you never miss a new video. And by the way, a lot of these myths came from a poll that I did on my Instagram a couple weeks back. If you want to get involved in future polls, be sure to follow me on Instagram. My screen name is right here, or there's a direct link right down in the description. Myth number 1 is that you should always keep your hands up and your guard high when you're fighting. And it makes perfect sense, because the most vulnerable part of our body is our brain. So we need to protect it at all costs. But that's not the only way to protect your brain. You don't always only have to block shots coming in. You can also use head movement or footwork to evade strikes coming in, or you could train in a martial art that doesn't necessarily punch at the head. And also we need to talk about the ranges that you're playing in. If you're playing in a close-up boxing range, then yeah, your hand should probably be up because those strikes are going to be coming really fast. But if you're slightly farther away in the more long range or out of range section, then there's no real reason to keep your hands up because again, there's no real risk of your opponent hitting you at that point. Not to say it doesn't happen, just it's not likely to happen. Martial arts is a fluid, nebulous concept that's going to adjust to every single person that practices it. And every single fight, every single assault is going to be different from the one before it. So nothing is ever always something, and everything is never nothing, right? Either way, I think we can say that the idea of always keeping your hands up is not true. Myth number 2 is that you should never ever kick with your toes, or your instep, or the ball of your foot, or your shin. That's 4 different options, and they can't all be true unless we just should never throw kicks. And I'm sure there's someone that believes that. But let's talk about the benefits and risks of each style of kicking. Obviously, kicking with the shin allows you to deliver the most power with the biggest weapon on your leg. Your shins are extremely long and extremely dense. So if your opponent moves left or right or blocks in a different way, that kick can probably still be very devastating. But kicking with your shin also means you have to commit more to the kick. You have to get closer to your opponent to land the strike, which makes you more likely to get grabbed and countered. Okay, let's get in a slightly longer range. Let's kick with the ball of the foot. Now, you're concentrating all the force from that kick into a very small surface area. But you also have a much smaller room for error. If your opponent moves left or right, you might actually miss the area you're trying to kick at. Or if you happen to catch an elbow or a knee, you could shatter your foot and make it unable for you to keep fighting. Now, the same thing is true if you catch an elbow or a knee when you're kicking with the shin, but because you can adjust easier with the shin, you can move out of the way of an elbow a lot quicker. However, like I said, you can get really precise and accurate with ball of the foot kicking, and there's a time and a place for it. Now, kicking with the instep or the toe. I'm actually going to consider these two the same category because they're basically the exact same area. If you're in the gym practicing your kicks, then the most vulnerable part of your feet are the instep and your toes, and those will break constantly while you're training if you're not careful. So yeah, when you're barefoot, be careful kicking with those parts of the foot. But what if you're outside? What if you happen to get assaulted while you're walking to your car and you happen to be wearing combat boots or just some regular rubber-soled shoes? Now, the most vulnerable part of your foot is actually the most dangerous part of your foot. Because just like with a boxing glove, now you have something protecting your foot so you can strike with reckless abandon without worrying about shattering those tiny little bones. And if you happen to have something with a hard metal sole, then now you not only have something protecting you, but a weapon to use against your opponent. So, should you kick with your shin? Should you kick with the ball of the foot, the instep, or the toe? I think the answer is yes. Myth number 3 is one that I'm pretty guilty of perpetuating. That being, you should never ever try to snatch a punch out of the air. There's countless, hundreds of thousands of self-defense techniques in martial arts that involve someone throwing a straight punch and getting it snatched out of the air and then taken down and flipped over and having their neck broken. These techniques are awesome, but they're not necessarily realistic because someone who doesn't know how to throw a punch won't throw a straight punch. They will throw something more looping. Or if they do know how to throw a straight punch, they won't leave it out there while you do that movement. They'll drop it to their pocket or they'll pull it back. Let's talk about the difference between this Kempo clip and this clip of a street fight that I found on YouTube. Now, obviously, this is choreography meant to teach concepts and principles rather than actual punch counters, but Does this look anything like what we're seeing in a street fight in the next clip? Obviously not. Those punches are flying super fast, and neither fighter has the ability to rush in and counter with a flurry of strikes. They're having quick one-on-one exchanges, one punch for one punch, or at most two punch for two punch. Long and short of it, even an untrained attacker will not leave their arm out in the open like that so you can grab it and then flip them over. Now, it is important to learn how to defend yourself from a punch, but this isn't the way. And these movements are awesome, but again, this isn't the way to learn how to apply them. That we can talk about in another video. So standing joint locks, standing arm bars, stuff like that, all totally possible and things you can do in a fight. But learning to do it off of a punch, not so much. Myth number 4 is that you should never ever go to the ground in a street fight. And this happens to be one of my favorite myths. Because yeah, on this channel I talk about fighting and self-defense in all ranges, but obviously I tend to prefer striking over grappling. However, I understand that grappling and wrestling are an important part of fighting and self-defense. But how many Krav Maga instructors do you know that will teach you anti-grappling techniques rather than learning how to shift your hips on the ground? How many Kempo instructors will teach you to just strike a pressure point to get out of an armbar rather than actually learning how to apply and escape from one? It is very difficult to keep yourself from going to the ground if your opponent wants to take you to the ground. That's why MMA fighters spend hours upon hours learning takedown defense. And if they do go to the ground, they spend more hours learning how to defend themselves down there. So it sounds like good advice. If you're worried about getting in a street fight, you definitely don't want to hit the pavement and worry about someone's friends coming to kick the crap out of you. But it's easier said than done. And if you're the kind of person that's worried about getting in a street fight, then you should be going to the gym and practicing all the techniques that you have to do when you get to the ground. If you don't do those things, then you're really just saying platitudes that don't mean anything. So, the myth of never ever going to the ground in a street fight, once again, has some nuance, but I would say it's just a lazy excuse. Now, number 5 is an old one. I don't really hear it nowadays, but this is something that was perpetuated by Bruce Lee as well as the early days of the UFC. That being that you should never ever kick above the waist. Because if you do kick above the waist, you might get your leg grabbed and taken to the ground. But I don't think the solution to that problem is to never kick above the waist. The way to avoid getting taken down when you're kicking is to get better at kicking. Learn to not throw your kicks and hang out in the air. Learn how to put your foot back on the ground when you want to put it on the ground. And I will say, Bruce Lee amended that statement later on once he trained with Chuck Norris and learned that, oh yeah, body kicks, head kicks, those are great tools to use if you know how to use them. The point that I'm trying to make is that sometimes some martial artists, some big names in martial arts and self-defense, will make comments that they don't really understand. Sometimes you'll get a striker who doesn't understand anything about grappling say something about never going to the ground. Or you'll get a grappler who doesn't understand anything about punching talking about how punching is an easy way to get your arm broken and taken down. And both of those things are true if you aren't good at doing either one of those things. And that's kind of like not being good at math, so you just decide to not practice math. And while I myself am not great at it, I do kind of have a fundamental understanding of it. If you're not good at kicking to the body, but you call yourself an honest martial artist, then you need to practice kicking to the body. So like I said, this is an old myth that no one really talks about anymore, but it does address a larger problem that I have in martial arts. Our 6th and final myth is going to be a twofer. Firstly, the idea that earning your black belt by default means that you're good at fighting. This should be true. If you devote 4, 5, 10 years of your life to martial arts, then at the end of that, it's probably safe to assume you're good at fighting, right? Wrong. Not every martial arts style is concerned with making you good at fighting. And some of the ones that are don't really offer the best path to get good at fighting. The best way to get good at handling yourself in a one-on-one situation is to regularly spar, practice realistic drills, and focus on getting good at fighting. Earning your black belt doesn't by definition mean you're good at fighting. The black belt should be a symbol of your fighting ability, but it isn't your fighting ability. If you really want a black belt, they're only like $5 on Amazon, so you can get one right now and be no better or worse at fighting than you were before you had it. Don't assume because someone has a black belt that they're good at fighting, and definitely don't assume just because you have a black belt that you're good at fighting. The second half of this myth is that training in martial arts or taking a self-defense course or even carrying a weapon makes you better at self-defense. The only thing that martial arts and self-defense courses can offer you is a probability. If you get in a self-defense altercation, martial arts training can help increase the likelihood that you get to go home. But nothing is ever guaranteed in life. Even if you train in martial arts and you are the best fighter in the world, someone can sneak up on you and attack you when you're not ready and get the best of you. So the idea that having a black belt or going to martial arts classes makes you some kind of John Wick super fighting guru is just not true. Doesn't mean you shouldn't do it, it just means manage your expectations a little bit more. All right guys, there you have it. There were 6 of the most common myths in martial arts. Some of them we could dismiss outright, but most of them had a little bit of nuance. There were some things that were true, some things that were not so true. And that's kind of the way most things are in martial arts. Anybody who tells you that something is always this and never that hasn't really thought through the thing they're saying to you, and they're doing you a disservice. There's a gray area for most things in martial arts, and I hope I was able to prove that to you today. If you enjoyed this video and you're looking for a channel that combines the practicality of combat sports with the reality of self-defense and the fun of traditional martial arts, then please be sure to subscribe, tap the notification bell, like, share, and leave a comment. This has been Rob from Combat Self-Defense. I want to thank you guys for all the hard work. Thank you for the hard work yet to be done, and I'll see you next time.